Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Patrick, and I'm the Associate Director of Economic Surveys and Programs with the National Association for Business Economics. We are pleased to present today's event, part one of our Women's History Month series, Perspectives on Economics Careers and the Pipeline. Before we start the program, I wanted to quickly point out a few upcoming NABE events and offerings. Don't forget to join us for part two of our Women's History Month series, of which you are already registered. On Wednesday, March 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern, 3 leading academic economists will explore their gender-based economic research. We hope you'll join us. E-Conversations with NABE is the official podcast for the National Association for Business Economics and your one-stop shop for catching up on the latest in business economics on the go. Every Monday following the jobs report, NABE President and Vice President Julia Coronado and Ellen Zentner will be sitting down to discuss the latest economic data and events. Listeners will also be able to catch up on our webinars. Simply search our name or E-Conversations with NABE to find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and be sure to click the follow and bell icons to stay up to date with our latest releases. NABE education courses for 2023 are open for registration. Visit nabe.com/CBE to learn more about how to sharpen and enhance your economic skills. We hope you'll join us for the 39th Annual NABE Economic Policy Conference, March 28th through 30th in Washington, D.C. Arranged around the theme, Orienting Policy for a Polarized World, the conference will assess the challenges facing global policy and business leaders as they navigate their countries and their companies through uncertain economic times, marked by geopolitical instability and mounting price pressures and enduring tests such as climate change, fiscal imbalances, and income inequality. The program features economic greats Michael Barr, Susan Collins, Philip Swagel, and Janet Yellen. The advance deadline is March 22nd. Please go to nabe.com/PC2023 for more information and to register. And while you're at it, save the date for the rest of NABE's 2023 conferences. We hope to see you in DC, Dallas, or on the West Coast. Now into today's event, note that we have Q&A open throughout today's webinar, allowing you to submit a question to the panel at any time using the Q&A box. It is my honor to introduce today's moderator, Anaya Truss-Williams, 2022-2023 NABE Scholar and economics student at the University of Maryland, College Park. Anaya, I will hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that we're spending our morning doing this panel because today is International Women's Day. And we get to celebrate it by celebrating 4 women economists who will shed a light on their experiences and how the economics pipeline can be improved. So today we have Kristen Broady, Senior Economist, Economic Advisor, and Director of the Economic Mobility Project at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Juhi Dhawan, Senior Managing Director and Global Macro Analyst of Wellington Management. Diane, Swonk, Chief Economist of KPMG, and Diane will be joining us a little bit later because she had to do something for CNN earlier. So a lot of these women have been girl bossing very early in the day already. And last but not least, Kirti Gupta of Qualcomm. She's the Vice President of Economic Strategy and Chief Economist. So thank you all for joining us today. And I'll just start out with a question about what inspired you all to pursue a career in economics. And Kristen, could you start for us?
So I went to law school originally, having majored in criminal justice undergrad, and I hated it. And so I then decided to get an MBA and a PhD in management. But at the very last minute, I was convinced by the department chair of economics to major in economics. So I ended up here by happenstance, and it was one of the greatest happenstances that ever could have happened. And I guess what motivates me, I always give this answer, and I feel like it's the answer that nobody else gives, but money mainly.
So I'm going to choose a little bit different track than Kristen's. Hi, everyone. It's nice to spend some time together today. For me, I'm just a puzzle solver. I love solving puzzles, and economics was so much about trying to understand how the pieces of the economy fit together, which really was something that I felt passionate about as I started delving into it. And in particular, the piece that sort of speaks to me personally has always been about making a difference for people. And I realized as I started studying economics that policy was a very powerful tool that could make a difference in the lives of people. And that intersection between sort of caring about outcomes and how they could sort of be impacted through these levers while solving for this puzzle kind of hooked me into economics, and I've never looked back.
And I'll jump in. Thank you for organizing this series of webinars on International Women's Day. It's just fantastic to hear everybody's stories. For me, economics was an afterthought in life. I'm an engineer turned economist, and quite frankly, I was, working as a design engineer, doing R&D and patents, and just looking for a hobby. And I was looking at things like anthropology and sociology, just things that interest me. And I turned to economics, and it was love at first sight because it was sort of that field that asks big picture questions. What is happening in the world and understanding that? And I think that was always kind of my quest. I just didn't know it. And then it condoned to the geek inside me because there was a method to the madness. There were tools and models and ways to understand that big picture and make a difference. So I pursued a PhD in economics while working as an engineer full time, and here I am working in tech.
Wow, I don't know how y'all figured it out so early in life, at least, how to pursue your passion and stuff. And I know that's something that I would be interested in hearing. But for now, just because you all are women of color, I'm interested in hearing how your other intersecting identities influence how you navigate the field, workplaces, and finding community within economics.
I guess I'll start again. I would say that the Chicago Fed has been the most welcoming place that I've ever worked. I think when I think about intersecting identities, the things that comes to mind for me is not really feeling like I could fully be who I was until I earned tenure, right? That I didn't come out publicly until I earned tenure, right? So I became an associate professor without tenure at one institution, and then I became vice president and full professor with tenure, like all at once, right? I was 38 at the time, and it was the most freeing thing in the world, right? But before that whole time, like I wasn't fully being who I am. And so I think working at the Chicago Fed and working on the Economic Mobility Project, it's like I can do the research that I'm passionate about in a welcoming environment and also receive great benefits.
So as an immigrant into this country, I guess I was used to being different, knowing that I had embraced this challenge and opportunity when I decided to come here. So I came very much with an open heart and an open mind. And over time, I think what really has helped me sort of grow into being very comfortable in terms of who I am and how I share who I am with the world is by recognizing the differences, by acknowledging what are sometimes bridges that need to be made and are never going to be fully, if you will, in unison, go in one direction, but also just being honest about who I am. I think that integrity of being honest to the person I am really helps, in my opinion, just helps you stay authentic. And that's really important, I think, for not just myself, but for lots of people around me, in knowing that that's what you bring to the table. I think today diversity is embraced exactly for the differences and recognizing them, not just for the homogenous self that sometimes people are more comfortable with, but are recognizing that it has its own limitations, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you, Juhi, for that. And Kristen, your story is so powerful. I think I want to piggyback on that a little bit and speak about the challenges from a different perspective of, growing up in corporate America in a big tech Fortune 500 firm and building a career into leadership over the last 20 years. And frankly, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are challenges. And there are challenges that are sometimes specific to women and even in addition, specific to women and minorities. Kristen touched upon some of those and they are important, life-changing challenges that affect people on a daily basis. And, I just from, her story is so powerful. I'm just speaking from my perspective. What I felt in the corporate world was that, for women in leadership, you always have to additionally do another layer of calculus about how to operate, how to ensure there's consensus, how to make sure that you're leaning in, but not far enough to be approached as or viewed as self-promoting or aggressive, even though, those are things that are necessary sometimes to succeed. So I think it's important to recognize, it took me, I would say, 20 years to, quite frankly, first acknowledge that there are systemic conscious biases which are outside and inside of us. It's not just outside of us, it's also within us. And second, to process them, to first recognize that they exist, and then to process that this is happening and identify when it's happening, and third stage, to address them, to be able to navigate them successfully. And it is my hope and passion to be able to shorten that journey, that 3-step journey for others.
Thank you. And I think it's interesting that you brought up women in leadership, because another question that I had is, how do you deal or even just navigate getting your point across to people when they might not want to listen to you, whether it's because you're a woman, because you're younger than them, or because you don't look like them? Because a lot of times a woman in a leadership position over, let's just say, men, or just people who aren't used to being led by a woman, just might not be used to even listening, or might question her, things like that. How do you navigate that? Have you dealt with that in your perspective, Kirti?
Sure, I can start. I would love to hear what others have to say. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important for those of you listening to make sure that you build your personal brand and you build your network of supporters early on in your careers. That's going to be incredibly helpful for navigating these challenges, which will come. They will come in some form or another. Kristen is nodding, and I know she has to say a lot about this topic. That is priority number one. And then, you need to be, I love the DSC model, direction, alignment, and then commitment. So you kind of need to, influential style leadership, not the more aggressive leadership, but here's the direction, here's what success looks like, get common alignment and then commitment to it. And then of course there will be challenging situations, and then making sure we understand what's the motivation of people we are working with, and working through those motivations is going to be an enormous challenge. There's no secret recipe.
Persistence has worked really well for me. I tend to be someone who knows repeat again. And I think that there is power in knowing that to bring along those who view you differently or think of things from a different lens, it is really important to provide transparency, to offer clarity of how you got to a certain decision, so that you can bring people along with you, as opposed to, well, I told you X is going to happen and therefore it is. And I think that speaks to what Keith was also saying in terms of creating that pathway that allows for that to take place. But in general, I found persistence tends to have a pretty good impact of allowing your vision to come through as you are put in charge of putting something together.
Kristen?
I guess it's interesting for me. I had issues like as an analyst or a research assistant very, very early on.
Mm-hmm.
But I became department chair at 32, right? So it's like I became a leader fairly early in my career. And I feel like I was a servant leader, a diplomatic leader. I got accreditation experience at my very first job, like even before I finished my PhD. So I feel like I had this experience and this network and everybody knew it, right? So I won't say that I wasn't questioned or challenged. Of course I was, right? Like I welcomed that though. I welcomed the questions and the challenges, but not ever in a sort of disrespectful way or like based on the fact that I'm Black or a woman or any of the other things, right? So I don't think I experienced the sort of challenges that Anaya, I think you're trying to get to, right? And I guess at this point, having reached those heights so early, I don't know. I feel like I've kind of developed a reputation that maybe if I am being disrespected, I don't realize it. I don't know, but I don't feel like I am.
That's honestly great to hear because it sounds like if you are questioned, it might come from a place of like understanding or wanting to grow. And that is really nice to hear because I'm not sure if y'all saw on Econ Twitter, but there was a paper recently that looked at how female presenters are interrupted more than male presenters. It's just really interesting, but that's a silver lining to hear at least. So we have a question.
I think for me, just to follow up on that, like in economics, when I think about seminars, like it is a back and forth, right? And so I guess from the different environments that I've worked in some of the spaces, I was the only Black person or the only woman. But I guess I felt like I was able to get into the conversation just as everyone else, right? Like it's been a very long time since I worked in an environment where I really felt disrespected because of one of my minority categories, basically.
Thank you. And there's a question in the chat that I want to go ahead and ask because it's pretty good. So how can women new to this profession create community of allyship to help them navigate being an economist? And what are some lessons that you've learned that you can share?
Network. I don't know. I guess I would say something that I really have found to be extremely powerful is to find time to get to know the broader economics community. So I work in the financial services area and have obviously know a lot of people in that field. But NABE, for instance, is a really wonderful opportunity for me to get to know people in all fields. So Kristen and Kirti and Diane, but folks who work in government, folks who are working in specific industries, really business economists across the field. And I think that it opens up the venues and channels of what kind of opportunities are available to someone who's trying to figure out where else they might want to, spread their wings and go. But it also gives you a sense of, like, I learn a lot every time I speak with my fellow economists, right? They bring up different points of views and how I might be viewing something. So there's tremendous ways and means of growth to be found in sort of creating that community of excellence around you, essentially.
Yeah, I think I would chime into that. I think it's important also be too strategic about your network. I like to say that every one of us should have our own personal board of directors. It's your own group of people that you're nurturing to be your mentors, because mentorship is a two-way street, and you're investing early on in that. The sooner the better, whatever your field is. And however constrained your environment may be, and academia tends to be less constrained in pursuing whatever. Well, it has its own constraints, right? Like you have to do R&R and papers and all that. But I come from the corporate world, and it had its constraints to certain projects and publications. But you can always find degrees of freedom in a way that add value to your organization, but also to your network. And I think you have to be an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, an entrepreneur inside a big organization. Find those new and the different projects, and based on those, create your board of directors outside and inside your organization.
So, full disclosure, I am the chairwoman of the board of directors of the Sadie Collective. So I would say, number one, join the Sadie Collective. Sign up on our website, follow the Sadie Collective. The mission of the organization is to create a pipeline for minority women into the field of economics, either into a research assistant or analyst position, or into a master's program or a PhD program. And then I guess the second thing, have a LinkedIn account, of course, right, and maintain it in a professional way. But I have made so many connections on Twitter, right? Just following people. I think one of the biggest ones, anytime somebody lists my bio. So I was a consultant for season 2 of The Quad on BET. And the producer of the show, who is also a producer for Family Matters and a bunch of Moesha, a bunch of other shows that we've all heard of, I followed her and I tweeted at her. Finally, she followed me back, and she read my paper on higher ed in Georgia, right? HBCUs in Georgia. So like that connection on Twitter led to me being a consultant on this show that just reinforced my knowledge base, right? Because it's like I wrote about this thing and now I've consulted, so those kinds of relationships reinforce the network and the career that we're all building.
Yeah, I love that. One door leads to the other.
Okay, so just to shift gears a little bit, there's another question in the chat. Since a few of y'all had an interesting introduction to economics, I'm wondering, when was the first time that you took or was introduced to econometrics? Because someone's wondering how important is it to take up the topic of econometrics for a career in economics. And yeah, Kirti, can you start for us?
You want me to start? Well, since I'm the case of the late bloomer in economics here, it was an afterthought. I was probably in my mid to late 20s when I started thinking of seriously doing a PhD in economics. And quite frankly, I went to UCSD and I took, they have this series A, B, C classes, and I was sort of in the B in the winter class. And I tried to take a macro and a microeconomics class, and I couldn't understand anything because I had never taken, any undergrad in economics. But I took econometrics and it was easy because, that's just random variables and probability. Like it's, I understand that language. And so I stuck to that. But I would say that was serendipity, and it was wise because it's the toolkit, it's the language of anything you want to ask, anything you want to do. But, don't lose sight of the fact that it's just the toolkit. You need to have the questions you answer, which are, if not more important than the toolkit itself, and don't compromise the questions for the method.
So Kirti, I don't know. I think I may have you be. Hi, Diane.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late. My deepest
Welcome.
apologies, but life is crazy. Sorry. Being a woman economist.
You just finished on CNN, and I just bought a house, like just seconds ago. So like in the beginning, when you said like we were all doing, different things, like I'm literally at the title company right now. My attorney just left. Anyway, so back to the question though.
This is our lives, right? Sorry.
I think I have you beat though, because I was a criminal justice major undergrad, right? So we took like an intro to economics course of some kind. So I took statistics as a prerequisite for the MBA program. And I tell my students this, and they always look like they made a mistake signing up for my class, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I failed statistics the first time I took it. I got a D in that class. It's the only D I've ever earned. I had no earthly idea what was going on. And so I studied and I took the class again. And that is the class that I have taught every year for the last 17 years. And I feel like I'm a better professor because I didn't understand it in the beginning. And I was so determined to not just make it make sense in a way that I could pass the quiz or the test, but like, I want to be able to explain this to other people and like see what it's done now, right? So I think that it is important whether you want to just know general probability or become a statistics professor.
That's a far more empowering story. I love it. Diane, what do you think about econometrics and its importance?
So, interestingly enough, not only did I take econometrics from the man who wrote the book, Jan Commenta, he was one of my mentors at University of Michigan, but even though I didn't do a PhD at Michigan, I did a master's in applied economics and an MBA at University of Chicago Booth, but I took every single statistics class through the PhD program because I was at Michigan undergrad and I was already in the graduate classes when I was an undergrad. So for me, unlike Kristen, it was actually, economics I got into because I'm a dyslexic and I can't do numbers, but I can do complex math in my head, and stats just was really easy for me. And econometrics was this window into things that helped me frame the world that I saw in a different way. And having such a terrific professor was great. Although, being 22 years old and in the PhD classes with all the PhD students on econometrics in my graduate program, he would turn to me in the middle of class and say, Diane, what am I going to say next? And that was a little unearthing, sort of shook my ground a little bit, but I always knew. So for me, it was very different than it was for Christine, but it was one of those, he was so supportive of me. And I have to share this one story because it is the nightmare we all have. Actually going to the final on econometrics, the last final, I was with a friend of mine and we showed up and we realized that everyone around us was not in the same final. They were actually anthropology PhD students, and they looked very different than we did as econ graduate students at the time. And so we were in the wrong final. And we called up our professor, and Jan Commenta, and he said, well, you're exactly in the right place about 4 hours early. Come back in 4 hours. And we came back in 4 hours. My colleague, we went to the top of his roof of his house, and he drank and still whizzed through the end of, that might be a bad metaphor, but aced the final. I did not drink in between that time before the final and did great on it. But for me, econometrics was very special, and having been taught by the man who wrote the book was an extraordinary experience.
And Juhi, do you have anything to add or bring up?
I mean, I think we've said plenty on the topic. Maybe two things that I would say are economics has a breadth of expertise available. So if you're not quantitative based, I do think you could still find careers in economics. I want to make sure that we don't make it so that somebody who's not into maths kind of goes, oh my God, I'm never going to, find something interesting to do. And then second, just to say that today, we have this entire new field of data science and data scientists, and that econometrics base is really what kind of gets you into that, right? So big data is just panel versus, doing time series or so on, but that econometrics base can be very useful for creating rigor in a lot of what we do in a practical way every day. So two different takes. I just want to be sure we don't exclude those who are not mathematically inclined away from it.
Well, and There's my dog, of course, too. Why not? In the middle of a webinar, my dog Bear. But, to dovetail off that, Juhi, and I'm really sorry I'm late, but economics is ultimately a study of collective human behavior, right? And this is what gets lost in translation, is that the modeling and the math give us a framework for thinking about it, but it is not ultimately the only thing we do. What we're trying to do is provide a framework for understanding something pretty complex, and that is, aggregate incentives and aggregate moves and changes in behaviors. And sometimes the dirt is in the detail of disaggregating that data and looking much more closely at what's happening to individual groups, which is very different than what's happening in the aggregate. You may have the aggregate being carried by one group. So all of that, and the idea that what we really do is a social science, and that we want to pair up with other social scientists and collaborate and not make it just about data, that every data point is a human being, I think is, one of the most important things we bring to economics.
Thank you. Those were actually really important points. And Juhi, I'm very thankful that you brought that up, just because I know as an undergraduate that the math can be a deterrent. But I'm glad you brought that up. And since we just discussed like another example of y'all girl bossing today, would y'all be okay with sharing an example of a time when you felt imposter syndrome, if you have felt it before in your career or a previous position, and how you overcame it?
Well, I can start this because as I'm an engineer turned economist, and quite frankly, engineering was my first career. I understand it culturally, contextually, and I didn't understand economics. I didn't start this career with a community of economists or having any sort of sense of bearings. My story is that I was an engineer at Qualcomm, and I was going to leave after my PhD, but I decided to stay to give it a go because at that time, the leadership of the company wanted to create a new role. And then one thing led to another. And now we have a global economics function, which is spanning multiple different challenges of the company. But for a long time, it felt like being in this sort of shaky territory where I just didn't have a full sense. And the thing that helped me the most is something we have touched upon this call earlier, to have a network inside, but mostly for me, outside my organization, of experts that I collaborated with on a regular basis. And that gave me the full scope, grounding map of navigating a career as an economist.
I'll just dovetail, and I know there's others who have a lot of experience with this too, but since I've probably got more experience than anyone on the call because I'm older, first of all, being dyslexic and being hiding that much of my early part of my career meant that I felt like I was always hiding this disability, writing, reading, sequences of numbers. I mean, that my mind could do complex math in my head. I'm kind of like an idiot savant, right? But, when I found, and, it was a really hard transition to make, but when I first started working, women dressed up like men in finance. We wore these suits that I even had wingtip pumps. I mean, we wore these suits that were very male in terms of their structure. I did refuse. I had a bow tie on for a while that I finally tied around my waist because I just couldn't take it around my neck. My heart goes out to men who wear ties. But, until I really stepped into what for me was my truth, was my femininity, and, having to work and be live on TV 4 weeks after I delivered my daughter, to work through my second maternity leave, and my son almost died. Those are not anything I'd wish on anyone. And once I stepped into the femininity and the person I am, that was right for me, my truth, and stopped trying to be something I wasn't. A man. I was never going to be the son my father always wanted, and I was never going to be a male economist. And by stepping into my truth, my career accelerated. And I think I was able to finally let go of some of the things that were holding me back by being so afraid of being seen for who I was. And so for me, that it's something that always haunts me still to this day. I do feel imposter syndrome a lot, but having a network, and to be honest, the NABE network, being asked by a woman president at NABE to join the board right after I delivered my first child was just stunning to me, that I was seen for the entirety of who I was. And that really made a difference. And this organization has been a key part of that, in dovetailing off the networking that I think is really important that we all do to support each other.
All right, I'll go next. So I think the best way to start is really to think about the journey that brought me to America, right? I came into a very different culture than the one I was brought up in. So I'm originally from India, and I did my all my education all through undergrad in India and came here for my PhD. It was a big gap from where I was in terms of the culture, the values and upbringing I had received until that point of time, and where I ended up. And so it did not feel comfortable. It certainly wasn't a case of my knowing what the norm was, if you will, for many, many things, whether it was in the classroom or outside the classroom. And that learning curve makes you often think that you're the imposter, because you're trying to balance out what you learned to where you are, and sort of how do you make that happen. And so this goes very much to what Diane said. Eventually, I just got to the point where I just bring my authentic self to wherever I am. It has two parts, right? It has the part that kind of how I grew up and values that were, inculcated in me over a period of time, some of which have evolved as I've learned many, many things in this wonderful country that I now call as home, and others where I still hold dear for what they mean to me and what they mean for my family. So it's a case of melding and growing, and sort of saying when you get to the point when that becomes growth, you stop thinking of yourself as the imposter, because you've embraced it and it's part of who you are.
Wow, I wish I was able to take more notes. So I feel like everything that you're saying, it can just be put on like mugs or just like sticky notes around my room to remind me of different things. But another question that I have, just to like follow up with that, how have you all learned to set boundaries in the workplace, whether that be like work-life balance or just being able to tell people what it is?
I guess I'll start with that one. I had an answer for the last one. And I guess I just wanted to really quickly say, like, as far as imposter syndrome, my father told me when I was really young, he was like, one day you're going to be on the television. One day you're going to be quoted. Like, and I had, like, when I was really, really little, he was very, very empowering in that way. And it's like, why am I going to be on the television? Like, what is this man talking about? To getting to Brookings and being quoted in the Wall Street Journal, right? And the Washington Post and being on CNBC, right? Like, he said it. He said, and when I got on, he said, I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew that if I said it enough, right? That, like, the whole goal was that I would never have imposter syndrome, right? Like, I'm going to tell you my wildest fantasy. And like he said, like, it was a fantasy at the time, right? But he's like, you made it come true. So yeah, I think just lifting that up.
Thank you for sharing that, Kristen. That's really good for us parents to hear. Really powerful. Sorry, what's your next question, Anaya? Boundaries.
Yes, it was about boundaries. So I'm trying to also pay attention to the Q&A, but how have you learned to set boundaries in the workplace, whether that be with work-life balance or with other things?
I feel like Diane is going to have a real good answer. So I'm going to start with this one because I don't, right? So I am a single person. I don't have any children, and I work and work and work until I just can't do anymore. And then I go on vacation and then I work. And so that's kind of my cycle, right? So like I work at the Chicago Fed and I love it. I love promoting the research that we promote. I love the work that I do with the Sadie Collective. Diane talked about Booth. I now teach at Booth, right? So from failing statistics at Jackson State University and then passing it to now teaching at the #1 MBA program in the nation, right? So it's like, I'm not good at that. So I want to hear what the others have to say because I love the work that I do and then I stop and take vacation. So I want to hear about what Diane has to say about boundaries.
Oh, you don't want to hear what I have to say, Christine, because I'm really bad at setting boundaries because I do love it as well. I mean, I have the privilege to be paid what I love to do. Unfortunately, I don't ever turn off. I do take moments of stillness, and actually went to go see one of my children over the weekend that they needed me, and I realized I needed to be needed. And I went to go see them and ended up had this amazing experience of being still, listening and learning, and also said yes to a dress for wedding, which is, the whole TV thing, the whole 9 yards. And that bonding experience is something I had never had with my own mom through more than one wedding, which says a little bit about my boundary setting. But practice makes perfect, and I'm a complex person. But at the end of the day, what I find is because I love what I do, I don't set boundaries well, but also I do eventually. I'm old enough now that I know how to advocate for others much better than myself. And one of my colleagues happens to be out on maternity leave right now, and she was very worried about what it would do to her career. And I said, I didn't have this opportunity, and it hurt me because I didn't have it. And I had to do what I had to do at the time to support my children as a single parent at one point in time. And many people think I was just ambitious. No, I do love what I do, but also, I wasn't just ambitious being on TV 4 weeks after I delivered my daughter. I mean, that was not ambition, that was survival. And I think that's really important to think about. What are our goals? What are we trying to do? I had an agenda to support my children, but also I do know how to be an ally. And I reassured my colleague that she's a rock star. She's going to come back, and the time she takes off, she'll come back more renewed. And much like Kristen, vacation is my time, even though I still answer calls in Spain from the Wall Street Journal. But it is one of my moments where, I can step into myself and just be. And I've also learned with my family and dealing with all the cancers from, I was the one who was responsible that NABE showed up at the World Trade Center on 9/11 back in the day. And then I got cancer 20 years later, 11 surgeries in the last several years. Wow. My family has been just amazing in that. And my kids, my adult children who've gone through a lot because of what I've gone through, they've been amazing. And for me, that is my recharge, and nothing comes between me and them, period. And you better not try to go after my kids either, because I am a lioness with her cubs. So for me, that's my boundary setting. And even though I've not been always as much around as I think I should have been, to have my children know and say to me, when I was having a hard time and coming to terms with some things, that they were there for me because I was always there for them. And that's what families do. That fills my cup. Unconditional love is something that to me sets its own boundaries and is boundless at the same time.
Yeah, for me also, like setting boundaries, quite frankly, it comes easy for me. Setting boundaries, Diane, I know you said you struggle with it. I have 3 young children. I have to have boundaries, period. It's just nature of the job. And look, I mean, I've made the mistake of working extra hard, not, taking the maternity leave long enough, obsessing over it, working through it, working on vacations, all of it, everything. And I would just say that, it's not necessary. Absolute. I mean, I won't do it again, and I don't advocate for it. I think that it's really important to prioritize wellness with a capital W. And quite frankly, I'm on this journey right now, and I have been for a few years, where I try to clear my internal channel and meditate almost every day. Not always successful, but it has really enhanced ability to concentrate and the efficiency of productivity. And that really helps in setting the boundaries to ultimately focus on what is the end goal of life. It's what Diane said. It's wellness and the people around you, their wellness.
Juhi, do you have anything to add? Okay, no worries. I have a better question that I've been saving for a while. So,
All right, go for it.
what is your favorite form of self-care? And is it different from what you did when you first started your career? I've been waiting to ask this one. I've been waiting for it.
So my favorite is exercise. It's something that, I used to think, well, I don't have time for it. And now I make time for it. It is part of who I am today. And I think that's something which is, it just yields dividends in so many different ways, especially as you get older. And so, that's something that I really enjoy. And time spent with my family is incomparable in what it does for me. So that's my favorite form of self-care, if you will.
I think for me at the beginning of my career, so at Jackson State, the business school is right across the street from the Walter Payton Center, which is where this wonderful gym is. And so self-care was working out twice a day, right? Like that's how we burned off stress, stayed in shape, etc. And so I still work out now, not nearly as much or nearly as hard. For me, it's the sun, right? Like being in Chicago, I'm from Chicago. I love it. Like it's one of my favorite cities. But for me, whenever I can be in the sun and hear or see and feel the ocean, that to me is self-care. So I try to do that as often as is reasonable.
I exercise like I run 30 miles a week, and I've gotten buff since I got cancer because they had to cut out, one of them was melanoma, and they had to cut out part of my arm. So I'm like, well, I'm going to grow muscle there. And so, for me, my kids know I'm so high strung that, you don't bother mom when she's working out because otherwise I'm not as good a person. And for me, it is an incredible stress reducer and also gives me a sense of accomplishment even in days where I don't have it. So I think that's really important to be able to keep your goals so that you do something that makes you feel like you've done and accomplished something every single day, because too often we get overwhelmed by everything. And to me, that's where I also, when I do get the luxury of being on softer soil, because I'm older now. So I run mostly on a treadmill, but when I'm out by Lake Michigan, in Michigan, where I grew up, I run closer to the beach, and the pattern and I things come to me that I put things together that I wouldn't see otherwise. And being outside and feeling that and experiencing the patterns of nature. And all of a sudden it triggers all the patterns in my head and makes me see things in different ways. So for me, exercise is, I'm right there with all of you. It's really important.
I would just, leave you with this thought. There are 3 things that are crucial in anybody's life, and everybody has to work for them: a calm mind, a healthy body, and a house full of love. Those are the three things we all ultimately need. And doesn't matter how successful you are or not, you have to work for them. So prioritizing that from the day one is going to be good.
Wow, okay. Well, thank y'all for that. We're getting close to time, so I'll ask a few more questions and try to make sure that I'm answering more from the chat. So what's the best advice that you have received in your career or that you would give your younger self when they first started pursuing a career in economics?
I'll start because it really hit me, and it's something that I live by today. I mentor a lot of people, but my mentor, my first mentor, and someone I still know to this day, he said, I didn't do what I did for you because I was altruistic. I did it because you made me look good. And I think one of the things that we often forget is that mentoring is a two-way street. I learn as much from the people I mentor, I hope, as they learn from me, at least. But it is also a two-way street. And I think that is really important to remember, because you can't just sort of ping someone and say, hey, mentor me. There is an organic part of it that has to grow, and there's a trust that comes from it. And I think that's really important. And if I have to give my younger self any advice, it would be, I thought my career was just behind everybody else's. I thought it was slow. And I look back at my, what I've done at times, and I said, what was I doing? Why was I in such a hurry? Why didn't I stop a little bit? And that's what I'm trying to, with people I mentor now, is remind them to take a breath and don't be so hurried. Don't feel so rushed, and don't feel like you're running behind, because you're really doing great.
That's exactly my advice to myself now, and to my younger self, and to people I work with in the mentorship, which I agree is a two-way street. It's simply this: slow down to speed up.
I guess I would say I gave a commencement speech at Jackson State, and the title was always be prepared to leave, but that scares people, right? So I don't want the Chicago Fed to hear that and think, wait a minute, is she prepared to leave? Like, no, I literally just bought a house. I'm not going anywhere. But I would say be prepared to accept opportunities, right? So if someone recommends you for something or points out something, I hear a lot of students saying, oh, Dr. Broady, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Don't shrink from opportunities. That if your mentor or your supervisor or whoever sees an opportunity for you and thinks that you're qualified and ready for it, be ready to accept it, right? Like, I'm not saying accept something that you don't want, but be in a position, save money and get your resume together and build your LinkedIn portfolio and build your network, all of these things, so that when someone does recommend you for something, you're ready to accept the opportunity, whatever it is.
Be yourself. I really think that there's so much that's unique to each individual and each person in the workplace, in life in general. And embracing your own super strengths and leaning into them is going to take you places that you don't personally believe today. And I really believe that.
Okay, and I'll ask one last question and then see if there are any more in the Q&A. But since y'all are relatively young compared to the rest of the field of economics, I'm just curious if you've happened to learn any lessons from people that are younger than you, and if there are even people that are younger than you in the places where you work.
Well, I get to go first because I'm the oldest one in the place I work. So, but having been the youngest one in my profession for a long time, not anymore, I learned a lot from my colleagues. I also learned when I had to speak up for myself, and it was really hard because other younger economists didn't like competing with me. And I was harassed, and it was a horrible situation. And I didn't know, for me, I learned a lot from bad lessons or good lessons to advocate for myself, I guess, but bad experiences from other economists, but also the collegial nature of what I got to experience, both as a young economist among other younger economists that were going through similar things I was. And also now I learned from every one of I'm so humbled by my team and how amazing they are. They outshine me every day. And that's an amazing, wonderful thing. And I get to learn from them every second of every day.
Well, I can go next. I just think that, what Diane, you said earlier, mentorship is a two-way street. I said it at some point in this particular call too. It's really important because you do learn in every interaction. You learn what to do, you learn what not to do, you learn a little bit about yourself, and you learn what to let go. And I think it's every person is a teacher that crosses your life. And in a relationship of mentor-mentee, sometimes that's forgotten, and it would be a good reminder for everybody.
So amongst the many pearls of wisdom I've received, I didn't pick this one as the one you asked for, Anaya, but I did learn from this one and have applied it often. I like hiring people smarter than me, so I learn from them. This is part and parcel of what I do every day. And it's a real joy. It honestly is. It's fantastic to see people grow. And it's great that I get to learn from them and grow with them. So, there's so many, the world continues to evolve and shift around us. And many young people have great perspective that I gain from every day. So it's a phenomenal opportunity to work. I never think of it in those terms, but if you had to think of age as a factor, I think working across the age spectrum is a great plus for anyone.
I'm not sure that I have anything completely new to add. I've learned a lot of technological stuff from students and life experience about different career paths, like how people apply the information that I'm sharing is always fascinating to me.
And just to wrap up, what else should we do to celebrate women and other underrepresented groups in economics, not just during Women's History Months, but all the time?
I bring a lot of people to NABE, and I actually bring my mentees to NABE that are not part of my group, that are just people that I've met through NABE, that are young people, and I make sure and, get them to be able to be exposed to other economists so that they can move up in their career. And to me, that's the best thing we can do, is pay it forward, is to open the doors where they might not have been open for us. Or we had to wedge them open or put our foot in them so they didn't close. And so for me, that's what it's all about.
I'll share a practice from Wellington that I know I've really embraced for lots of other venues as well. And that's really having get-togethers for women only. I know we do that at NABE, we do that in lots of other places, but also for underrepresented groups, having those networks and having those regular opportunities, I think really creates comfort zones for a lot of people who might start off perhaps a little tentative, but that collective force really gives a sense of strength and allows people to find that authentic voice. So I'm a big advocate of leaning into that.
So I would first just shameless ask if Diane would follow me back on Twitter. That would be an amazing celebration. I would also say,
absolutely. Are you kidding? I can't believe I'm not already following you. I feel terrible that I'm not, but I
that
will
would be amazing if that happened.
Believe me, Kristen, you are now on my list.
that would make my whole life happen. Check out the Sadie Collective.
I think I'm the last person on earth who's not on Twitter. I would join and then follow you too, Kristen. when I joined. I think all that needs to be said has been said about how to bring women together. The one thing I would like to reiterate is to make sure that we all support each other. To me, that has been critical in my career. And I have actually received enormous amount of support from other women. And I look forward to keep passing that on.
Well, thank you all for sharing all of that wisdom. I will be following y'all wherever y'all are. Actually have accounts and everything. And Kirti, if you ever come up with a book of just like wise words, I would love if you could share that on LinkedIn, just so we could all see that.
The bumper stickers.
Yes, exactly. But thanks everyone for listening today and sharing perspectives.
Yes, thank you all. On behalf of NABE, I'd like to thank each of you for participating in today's panel and giving us the honor of hearing all of your stories. And Anaya, thank you so much for moderating. Before we disconnect, as a reminder, video recordings of past webinars are available in the newsfeed on the NABE Connect app, which can be downloaded in the App Store and through Google Play. NABE members can also access webinar recordings through the digital archive on nabe.com. And of course, as mentioned before, you can listen back and share the audio from today's webinar on our podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Today's program is copyright 2023 by the National Association for Business Economics with all rights reserved. This concludes the webinar. We'd like to thank each attendee for spending the last hour with NABE